Good morning, friends. Today I want to talk about the right way of gaining mastery over your senses. And why is that so important? Because the four layers that we have always talked about senses, mind, intellect, and soul are the four levels at which we can identify ourselves, whether we are a mudha or a deluded person, or a jnani or a knowledgeable person, no matter who we are. Every single living, throbbing life in this world is going to identify me, as one of those four levels. For the most part, the Western world tells us that we are this body and we are the senses. So the sensual gratification remains the prime objective of life. And that is something that the Eastern cultures and the Eastern Vedic spirituality challenges all the time, that you are something beyond this body and senses. And even for the most intellects people, you're not even this mind, the constant thinking that you're doing. You're not even that, because you will see even the mind gets modulated by the environment you are in. So you are the soul, but that is a very hard concept to grasp on an existential basis. It's more easy to relate self as the mind, because मैं or me, you thought about me, my, when you're a small kid, as a toddler, and when you grew up as an adolescent, as a youth, as an old person. But me is still inside there. So mind correlation becomes easier. Senses is something we always try to gratify and prevent inflicting any pain to, because that's the nature of the body, to protect itself and live on this earth. But that's why there can be delusion that you are the senses, or the sense gratification is the only purpose of life. So how to gain mastery? You will see that I did not say how to control the senses. You don't control the senses, you control the mind, you gain mastery over the senses. That's the right approach. So how to gain mastery over the senses? The first thing to understand is that suppression, nigraha, daman, is not going to work long term with the senses. You can suppress your senses for one time, two times, but they will come back with forceful vengeance and kind of usurp your initial plans and just kind of drift the mind with you. Yatato hyapi konte purushasya vipaschita indriyani pramathini haranti prasabham mana. Every strong individual who has tried to suppress the senses by force has been the first and the most is the biggest victim of the usurpance or the turbulence that the senses can create. And that's why you'll see that certain gurus, they have committed the most heinous crimes, or they have gotten into trouble, because if you use the path of suppression, the long-term success is not there. You are using concealment, hypocrisy, mithyachari. So that is not going to work. Now, the right way is to understand that the senses are going to get addicted to something. There is no way that the senses will remain idle. Just like your mind cannot remain idle unless you have totally meditated and focused, laser sharp concentration onto one object that you want to think about, contemplate about. Senses, 100 times more, they cannot remain idle. So they have to find something to latch onto. It's like a receptor that has to bind to a ligand. You have to attach to something. If you're uterus, you have to bear children. Kind of that biological urge that most people have. So the senses will attach to something. Now we have 5 senses, the Jnanendriya, and 5 Karmendriyas, or the action senses. So what our best approach is, if we want to evolve and advance in the practice of soul growth, or the growth of the Atman, it's very important to recruit the 10 senses in the right direction. Some of the things that I have done, and you can call it distraction, you can call it course modification, but basically it is about utilizing the senses in a region where they are kind of constantly activated and involved, so they don't have the free time to bind to the objects of sensual gratification that cause our soul destruction. So what do I mean by that? I mean by those addictions in the sense that we usually grasp it: addiction to food, addiction to wealth, addiction to gambling, addiction to sex, any addiction that long term is causing not only devolution of the mind but also of the soul and the body, and leads you to have more long term pain for the 7 seconds of gain, if you will, that it caused, or create a compulsive need to create some sort of damage. You are on a collision course, you've almost felt like you could not stop yourself. So how to stop that? Suppression will not work, course diversification will work. So diverting the course is what will work. So you have to involve the senses of vision into sight. So you have to see beautiful scenery. That's why you should travel. Please travel a lot. Please see beautiful Netflix documentaries. Please go to different places and see beautiful mountains, oceans, whatever landscape you love. You should do a lot, because that is causing a lot of recruitment of the sensation of sight to see the right kind of views to gain serenity. Because you are kind of made up of nature, the 5 tattvas, and you are seeing the 5 tattvas, be it water in an ocean, or the mountains as the prithvi or the earth element, or you are seeing the sun as the fire. But whatever you see, moon, the light of the sun, the fire. So whatever you are seeing, moon watching, seeing the beautiful mountains, ocean waves, please go ahead and do that, because that is going to satisfy the sensation of sight and use some of your time. You only have 24 hours. So if you do that every day, morning walks on the trails, or going and seeing beautiful things, beautiful documentaries, then you have kind of exhausted the sense of sight. Then it won't crave to see something. For that matter, if you're thinking about pornographic content, it's not going to crave that, because you have already satiated that in another sense. But it has to happen constantly. And most people love travel, so that's a great segue to kind of destroy any sensual pictorial gratifications that might cause devolution of the soul, or might cause some compulsive behaviors in you, in the way you think about your partners in relationships. So that's how to control the sense of sight. Another sensation that you need to control and gain mastery over, that is immensely helpful, is the sense of hearing. Now, you can hear about news, which is kind of very disturbing these days, how much political views are clashing and how much extremism we are getting, the alt-left, the alt-right. We don't want that. We want to keep away from violence. We want to keep away from instigating news. We want to stay away from news for the most part. Know what's going on in the world, that's enough. You don't need an hour long of animated news and kind of allegations and counter allegations. You don't want that. You don't have that much time in your life. Your time is very limited on earth, and you have to use it, especially when you are young and your minds are totally capable of grasping a lot. So you have to do a lot of reading good stuff. And I'm sorry, audiobooks you can listen to, or YouTube videos. You can listen to chanting, a lot of chanting. And it's like music, because music has always been a thing of rhythm. They say the universe is created out of vibration, and vibration happens in rhythms with a certain frequency that is very soothing to your soul, because that is who you are. And that's how we know that chanting, whatever you like. If you like Hanuman Chalisa, you go for it. You like Aditya Hridayam, you go for it. You like Narayan Sutra, Purush Sukta, you like Bhaj Govindam, whatever you like, please go ahead and do that. And you can always kind of maintain variety in that as well. But it's more important to constantly, repeatedly listen. And listening is amazing, because with food, there's only so much you can eat. You get satiation, your belly bloats up. But with music, you can listen again and again. The two ways of building memory are Shruti and Smriti. Shruti is what you utter and listen, and the knowledge you grasp by hearing and repetition. And chanting, when you listen to Krishna Das singing Hanuman Chalisa and you kind of sing with him slowly, when you learn it, you feel better about it. There is participation, there is teamwork, and then you feel you are doing something which is great. And once you learn something, the ego kicks in that, oh, I know Hanuman Chalisa. You feel good about it. And that's a good expression of the ego. So please chant a lot, and you will not love it in the beginning. Take it from me, I have been there. But at some point you will be in a place where you just immensely love it, and you will, when you're singing, your voice might even change. You feel like, okay, are there other good spirits or angels coming into your body and singing with you? Probably. I cannot explain that, but you sometimes feel your voice has changed if you are in too much of utterly devotional bliss, and that is where you have to get sometimes. It's not always possible, but the more you practice, the better you get at it. So a lot of chanting, listening to Ramakrishna Paramahansa audio casts, Vivekananda dialogues, the more you listen, because it's basically surrounding yourself in the shell of the right gunas or the material modes of nature to influence the way you think. So that is another thing you can do. Also, you can read a lot. You can read about good books or stuff that, if you're a reader, because lots of people are not listeners but they read stuff. So you can read those spiritual books of Bhagavad Gita and see what kind of information you can extract. The third thing that you can do to kind of gain mastery of your senses is to talk about stuff. So once you have read or listen to things, obviously you have to disseminate that information. So that dissemination can happen by talking to your friends. That dissemination can happen for me by talking to you folks and making videos, because then I know that I have shared that information. And even if one person is benefited by this information, I feel I've been able to communicate my point to that person. So always speak about stuff, because that also kind of creates a good vibe around you. All you're trying to do is create this good vibe or the material mode of nature around you. And once you have created the vibe, you will live in that vibe. There will not be enough tormentations and temptations trying to distract you every time. Because the two ways to gain mastery, as you know, is Abhyasa and Vairagya. Abhyasa is to constantly repetitiously, just constantly do the same thing again and again, over again and again, until you start loving it. And Vairagya is trying to have an intellectual discussion in the mind, where you're trying to convince and rationalize as to why you should not be eating too many cookies or watching too much of porn. So that kind of thing, when you have that discussion and dialogue in your brain, you're trying to create demerits all the time, then the distractions over time will get weaker and they will dissipate, and you won't be tormented by them anymore. If your character is like milk, if I add water over it, it will mix and your character will dilute more. But if your character is condensed like a butter, even if I add milk on it, it will float on top. So you have to condense your character through the practice of meditation, through the practice of senses diversification, through using the path and channels that are allowing the sense to be constantly involved when you're awake. And in that way, they are involved in the right things, so they don't have this urge to go and attach to something which is more damaging to you in the long term. So friends, the last thing I would say is that if you cannot do good, please don't do bad. Please don't do destructive things. And the way to यदा संघर्ते चायम कूर्मो अंगानी सरसा इंद्रियाणी इंद्रियार्थे बस्तस्य pragya pratishtita, which means just try to retract your limbs like a tortoise retracts its limbs inside the shell when it sees danger around yourself. So if you're seeing environment that you don't want to be around, if you don't want to be, you are a recovering alcoholic, don't be around people who are drinking. If you are recovering substance abuse person, so don't be around narcotics or Xanax. So you have to restrict yourself. Don't be involved in jobs that involve pharmacy, where you're dealing with medications on the side, or anything where you are that might tip off the brain and you have to go there. Oh my God, I remember that I had to do. So you have to stay away from the memory, whether it's visual, whether it is listening memory, whether it is contemplating memory. You have to stay away from the things that have caused weakness, especially during the period when you're growing. So you have to retract your limbs, just like a tortoise retracts its limbs inside the shell, so that the objects do not get attached to the objects of sensual gratification. Objects are the things that cause temptation. Objects of sensual gratification are senses. So, my friend, just to sum it up, you have to gain mastery over the senses, because senses are your enemy, number one. Mind can be friend or enemy, senses are enemy. To control the enemy, you have to be very tactical. Don't try to suppress it, because this enemy is stronger than most of us. That's why we are here and trying to do the drill on this planet Earth. When you have kind of understood they are enemy and they are stronger than you, you have to use a tactical approach. The tactical approach is diversification and divertification, which means you are diversifying them in the 5 different senses, and then you are diverting their goals. So you are not eating too much cookies when you're depressed, because you have a good thing to do. You have to make YouTube videos, you have to read about stuff, you have to listen to chanting. There's so much to do, there's so much of sensual engrossment that you have to create. So you have to create a lot of sensual activities that have a divine component. Listening to chanting music, reading about scriptures, talking about stuff with your friends. So you have to have the right company who enjoy the similar discourse, and that way you guys can talk amongst yourself, and that's why satsang works, by the way. You will grow together and kind of feel better. And also travel a lot, see beautiful places, mountains, oceans, canyons, trails, whatever brings happiness to you, and try to avoid the influences that can kind of hijack your mind and make you go back into eating or doing the addiction things, gambling, whatever it might be, and making your life miserable, because you don't want to repeat this cyclical miserability. When you know there's a certain time of the day that you tend to get miserable, try to amp up your activity of chanting, try to amp up your activities of making YouTube videos, or try to amp up the activities of reading beautiful scriptures, try to amp up your activity of traveling more and seeing stuff that will bring happiness, try to engage the mind in playing tennis, ping pong, do whatever brings happiness, and kind of creates course redirection, in which way you will be feeling more meaningful in your life, feeling more joyful. And once you have done that through the practice of Abhyasa way too many times, you are way too strong, just like a lump of condensed butters floating on milk, to get influenced by the surrounding influences, whether good or bad. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave your comments below.